Welcome back, folks, after our break. We're going to shift gears now in terms of talking to our staff, our folks that really keep the legislature going. That is our legal staff, our legislative council. It's also our legislative operations staff, and it's also our joint fiscal office. One thing that has been discussed and is contemplating is moving some of our folks to Aiken and 4 Aiken. 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken is currently where the Department of Buildings and General Services is housed. And we need a little further conversation in terms of our legislative council, our legal staff, if they were to move there to 2 Aiken. What are some of the implications of that? What are some of the needs that they see would need to be addressed? Some of the problematic issues or some of the positive issues? And that would be the same question for our legislative operations piece, which would involve overseeing our committee assistants, the day-to-day functioning of the legislative council arena, as well as our joint fiscal office, which is our fiscal arm. At the Pink Lady, there is also some of our legislative council folks there housed. Some of our lawyers are housed in the Pink Lady, and how that would impact if they were to move out of the Pink Lady. So Michael O'Grady, I'm going to turn it over to you for the legal aspect of, or not the legal aspect per se, but how any move, particularly to 2 Aiken, would impact our legal counsel, our drafts folks, operations of the legislative council. Thank you.
So this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council again. Yesterday, Luke Martland, the Chief Counsel and Director, and Jen Carby, the other co-deputy director, met, and we have certain provisions that we've all agreed on. First, our initial preference is for the office to stay where we are located in the State House and in the Pink Lady. We believe that the services we provide, access to services that we provide for legislators will be at a higher standard if we remain in the State House. If we are elsewhere, then it's going to be difficult for legislators to have the same access to us. It's going to be difficult for staff to be able to have the ability to go to multiple meetings and or to do the work that they need to do in between meetings. So our preference is to stay where we are. If we are required to move, the office has a strong preference for 2 Aiken. 4 Aiken just seems unsuitable. It's not nearly as nice as 2 Aiken. There's a smell. There's just not as professional a workspace as there is currently in the State House, or what we would see as possible in 2 Aiken. If we were to move to 2 Aiken, we would need some alterations or some insurances for the office to meet our needs. For example, we strongly believe that attorneys are going to need their own individual offices in order to provide legal advice and services to members in a confidential manner, which is required by the rules of professional conduct and by state statute. We also think that the drafting operations staff, if they are to move with us, will need some retrofitting of some of the space in 2 Aiken in order to meet their needs, in order to provide editing in a quiet and appropriate professional manner. And if we were to move, and if the alterations are to be implemented, we would like to have input onto what they are, and we would like to review them before that they are constructed or implemented, so that we know what we're getting and we approve it and we can provide our input if things aren't going the way that we think is appropriate. There's likely going to be some resistance from some members of our individual staff who just do not want to move. So even though this is the position of Luke, Jen, and myself, there are still going to be others that resist, and you will likely hear from them. In addition, we do not think the move needs to be made prior to the end of next session, if at all. I just think it's going to be difficult for our office to make the move, have the building retrofitted, approved to our standards, and get everyone in there by January. So again, we prefer to stay where we are. If we need to move, we have a strong preference for 2 Aiken with alterations and retrofitting that we approve prior to implementation and prior to our move. And that move would occur after next session, if it were to occur at all.
Questions?
It's pretty clear.
John?
In 2 Aiken, how would you foresee dealing with any staff members that might have physical limitations and not being able to get up the stairs? And also members who might need to meet with an attorney who can't get to the attorney's office?
Well, that is partly why I referenced why we prefer to stay in the State House.
Why am I not surprised you say? No.
There are legislators that come by some of our offices every morning, every day. Some of those legislators are not fully, they don't have as much flexibility in moving around as others. So they're going to lose access. We will need to figure out a way to accommodate any employee that is over there that has a physical limitation. I don't know if there is a public accommodation provision at 2 Aiken. I was assumed because it's a public building that there is, but I don't know for sure. But it will limit.
Oh, right.
During the visit, didn't
First floor.
Just the first floor.
Okay.
And that's the same at the Pink Lady. Pink Lady is not accessible much.
So, and one of the other things, it's gonna affect how we do our job, especially if the committee rooms are spread out across the whole state capitol complex. If one committee is going to be meeting in the pavilion and one's going to be meeting in the State House, we're going to be late. We're not going to get to your committees on time. It's just not going to happen. And so we might have to leave early in order to go to another committee. So there's going to be logistics involved that I think the committees will need to adjust to.
Allison and then Janet.
So, Mike, I mean, this is just, again, one of those assumptions. I assumed that 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken, because I think 4 Aiken has lots of possibility, but you're right, not as it is now. I just assumed that they were going to be renovated and completely redone to suit your needs if this happened. So I had that, I mean, that's an assumption I had made. And did you discuss that at all with BGS?
Not that I discussed with BGS. Jen and Nadine Martin were the two that took the tour with the commissioner. Luke and I did not, but from Jen and Nadine's account, 4 Aiken is really not suitable for our needs. And so
The office space is in 2 Aiken. The individual offices are there in 2 Aiken.
But renovated, 4-acre could do almost anything. I mean, 4-acre has lots of possibilities. You just have to rip a lot of it out and start again.
Well, remember, we're talking about historic structures, and so we are limited in terms of what we can do for renovations and those are very historic structures, right? It's the
Even
National
4
Life Guest
acre?
House, and that's the carriage barn. And so I'm not saying you can't do renovations, you certainly can. I'm just saying that there are some and David should be helping me here. There are some
I will.
limitations, David, correct, when it comes to historic preservation. So I just want to make sure that we're making that clear.
Interior and exterior.
Well, they usually control exterior. There are some historic components of the interior of the buildings as well. So we would just want to, David, I'm speaking on behalf of you, David. I shouldn't be doing that, but
Yeah, no.
there are some features I would assume you would want to.
Yeah, I mean, 4-acre as a carriage barn, the interiors don't exist anymore, right, as a
That is
carriage
correct.
barn. So that's not as sensitive as 2-acre, which is much more intact, much more intact.
Janet?
So I was just going to ask about the legal staff that's currently in the Pink Lady. So they do the traveling back and forth to the State House. And I guess I was just curious whether they're part of who you're speaking for, whether they have a different perspective on moving and whether we're even talking about moving them. I'm not even sure about that.
So again, we would all prefer to be where we
Got it.
are. Some in the Pink Lady are those that are expressing the most resistance to moving, and you will likely hear from them.
Got it.
They really want to prefer where they are, and they don't want to move. Others are more amenable to it, with, again, 2-acre being the preferred option if we are not going to stay where we are. And did I answer all your questions? I think there's one
Well, was
outstanding.
No, you made a point about having to, go from one building to another and being late and going to different committees and so on. And our committee has been staffed by a lawyer who is in the Pink Lady and seems to manage that okay. And I just was curious about.
So it's interesting that you bring Abby up, because Abby also
It
used to
was actually
work.
Peter.
Or Peter.
But anyway, yeah.
But Abby used to work in the tax building, and she now works in the Pink Lady, and she says that there's a difference, that it takes longer to get from down that way than it does to get from the Pink Lady. And so I still think that there's reservations
Yeah.
because of that.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you for let us know how you guys feel. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But I'm curious if it's the resistance is mostly because of the commute time or because of the physical structure, assuming you got 2-acre and it was retrofitted or renovated. I mean, your space you have right now in the State House isn't awesome space.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering
No.
what's the difference between the two besides the separation?
Well, I haven't been in the BGA. I haven't been in 2-acre in years. I do recognize that it's a pretty nice building for state buildings. But it is an old building. It's kind of like the Pink Lady. It's a little bit of a maze. It's a little bit of outdated, and it's something that will increase the time that is required for us to provide the services that we provide, or just getting places. And so we're already under pressure to be where we're supposed to be on time. And there's not a lot of empathy when we're not on time. And so I think there are concerns that people are going to be running around, and it's going to affect their job performance. in a building that may not be as good as the current spaces.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear there's not a lot of empathy. That's on us and we need to change that. And I'm sorry to hear that. One thing is 2 Aiken has a ton of bathrooms. You guys would all get your own bathroom.
Well, I'd love a bathroom on the mezzanine right now because we don't have one.
Exactly. So put that
Nor
in
do we
the
have air
plus column.
conditioning right now.
Right.
So,
Exactly. I think there are some pluses to that space. It's kind of a cool space.
And we love the space. I just want folks to know it's been our home for so long and we love the space. So I understand moving is hard, but it is a nice space.
Yeah.
Allison?
Mike, do you think that, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but one of the things we will be contemplating is the expansion of the State House. Do you think it would be more palatable to Legislative Council if this was interim move until the expansion was complete?
I can't really answer that until I know what you're actually going to propose for expansion, because the Freeman French report had multiple different alternatives, and some of those alternatives conflicted and some of those were confusing, especially with regard to our drafting operations staff. I think they actually had them located in 2 different places under one alternative. So I can't really answer that until I'm more certainty about what you would recommend.
You have your hand up. Okay.
Michael, I want to take a brief moment to talk about your testimony in front of my committee to set up for this committee some of our responsibility. We are also charged with looking at the long term. And I think everybody agrees that if you had a magic wand and looking at the long term, if everyone was in the same locality, it would make a heck of a big difference on work product and relationships. And that's something to work towards. Short term, figuring out exactly what first baby steps we have to take. The obstacles we have right now is we're waiting for reports to come back. BGS can start hammering. They hammer wherever they decide to hammer. We can't get to that part of the conversation, but we can talk about your present space and the fact that you don't need to move prior to those studies coming back and the hammers starting to fall, because it wouldn't make any sense to move you right now, even if 2 Aiken was available, because there's nothing that's going to go on in your offices. So for the next session, I'm going to suggest we need to agree with you that you shouldn't be moving right now. And if you are going to be moving, it would be done at a time when we have at least a preliminary understanding of what the long-term objectives are going to be. Try to alleviate some of the concerns of your staff, which you guys came in and gave us a brilliant presentation. This committee is going to have to undergo that same conversation to get up to speed. But in baby step terms, our next report due the 15th of August, I would submit to the committee that we shouldn't be asking Pledge Council to move out of its current space prior to the end of the next session.
So is this in response to what Joe just said?
This is in response to what Joe just said. So I just want folks to know,
You're moving.
because this is important to me. I'm happy to move. I think the move for us makes a lot of sense. So don't be worried about the fact that we're moving. We're moving. What I am concerned about is we're going to be homeless until we can move on to the 5th floor, which Joe is telling me is November 1st. So right now I have given my staff a date to be boxed and out of that building. And so the only thing that I'm saying here is that I would prefer not to be homeless if I don't need to be homeless, because I will tell you that working remotely, just like you guys, legislating remotely is really challenging. And I have come back to work 5 days a week, and Joe will attest, and so will these guys, that I love coming to work every day and seeing BGS employees. It's the best part of my day. So I'm only offering that if.
What is your timeline?
We're talking the same language.
I think it's fair to say that if Pledge Council, our legal piece, moves out of the mezzanine, what are we gaining for this current legislative session?
I'm moving. As soon as the fifth floor is done, I'm going.
No, that's not the issue. The issue is the time frame. If we decide to move Ledge Council to 2 Aiken prior to the session beginning, we have to start.
Then it matters.
We have
I
to
agree.
start that pretty soon.
I agree.
But then the next question is, what would we use that freed up space come January? Is there a need to move Ledge Council prior to this coming session or not in terms of our world in the legislature? What would we use that freed up space for?
House committees.
Don't know. So we got a lot of people who want to talk here on this. Anthony was to go next. I don't know what you were going to mention. I don't want to lose this thread.
No, it's exactly, it's very much the same thread. I appreciate what you just said. I had the same question about what do we gain by having to move out of that space? We gain a bunch of little offices that aren't going on the face of it going to do us much good. I also think legislative council moving would have to be looked at in the context of the other potential moves that are going on. When Michael talks about leaving from one building to another, I mean, if we're talking about having some meetings in this space here in the Pavilion building, we looked at the tax department building. I mean, there's a lot of potential moving around in the middle of the winter there that could be pretty tedious for people. So I think I would really be sympathetic to his statement that it would be, they would be late for things. They would have a hard time getting to me to put their coat on in between, going from one committee to another, going around the slippery parking lot. It's just a lot of, it could be real pain. And I don't think we gain much of it.
So Ruth had her hand up and then Allison. And then Butch.
I think, I mean, notwithstanding the resistance, and that is real, and I hear you, Michael, and so I don't want to belittle that, but putting that aside, I think that we potentially have a lot to gain from using that extra space. We could put a coat room in there and then free up room 9 for a committee room. We could put a legislative lounge back there and free up the current legislative lounge for 1 or 2 conference rooms or committee rooms. We could have a little bit more private space for us to stow our own things. We might have another bathroom that is accessible for people. We would have more meeting spaces, I think. And I think that it would reduce the necessity of using both the tax building and this building because we could have extra space within the State House itself. So I think it would actually potentially reduce the running around for staff and legislators because we'd have more possibilities in the building. If there are a few really tight, problematic House committee rooms, we can move them and we can find a room for Ag, Senate Ag, and just have bigger options for committee rooms. And so I think there's a lot of potential to that space. And this is one of the things I talked with Stephen about quite a bit. I think we're also, I understand that this is like physical moving around and doing a lot of stuff and potentially, a bad time of the year in terms of weather, but we turned on a dime. The entire world turned on a dime with COVID, and we accommodated so many things that we didn't think we could accommodate and did so many things that we didn't think we could do with the help of brilliant people like our legislative technology and operations staff and council and JFO and all of us and BGS. And we did all of that, and we can do it again because we can make the space safer and more comfortable by moving things. And we have to make sure the staff is okay with it and goes along with it and is accommodated. I agree. We have to make sure the space is accessible, especially to people with physical limitations or disabilities, but we can do it. And it might solve other problems that we're facing.
Right.
Good points.
Could I just want to let you know that morale right now is low. It is probably the lowest I've ever seen it since I've been here in 15 years. We're down 3 attorneys, maybe more like 4.5. And we're getting calls at like 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 in the morning on Sunday. There's a complete breakdown of boundaries
It's
of
not acceptable.
professional and personal life. And to now then say we're all up and moving by sometime this fall, I think you're going to see morale suffer even more. And I just wanted to put that on the table.
You know, it's really disturbing, Michael, to hear that those calls, they're coming from legislators, particularly off session at those times. That is unacceptable.
My favorite is the other day I got a call on my cell phone, but I was on it, so I didn't take the call from the legislator. So the legislator called my home phone. It was like my mother, when my mother doesn't get through to me immediately. You know, there's an expectation of immediate access, and a lot of us are facing that more than some of the others, but it's a little wearying.
Well, that's what the world of Zoom world has created, is the lack of boundaries. So,
On social media and lots of stuff.
so Allison, you had a.
So I'd add, and sort of notwithstanding the morale issue, it's, I'm really sorry to hear that. And I think sadly, particularly with new legislators, that maybe some of that, maybe we need to clarify what's acceptable and not acceptable again. Because I think lots of us assume that. And again, assumptions, we need to be clear about expectations. I agree with Ruth. I think particularly if we're looking at a big expansion, we could manage a lot in an interim period with a sense that it's an interim thing. So I think that the mezzanine space provides a lot of space. For example, if we decided to share committee rooms, a morning and an afternoon committees, particularly in the Senate where we operate that way, we could have committee staff in those rooms so that they could have private space to meet with their committee members if they needed to and to do their work. They have the luxury now of having a whole big room all day, but it's conceivable we could be more efficient about sharing our Senate committee rooms and having staff up in the mezzanine if we needed to. So that's an additional thing because that's something that we have discussed. But I think as if we are going to embrace, it sort of goes back to our understanding of air quality and air flow. If we're going to embrace a standard, best practices, I think it does make some sense for us to be looking at all these new committee possible use of other rooms like the lounge, like room 9. And if we do that, that means we would have different needs and the mezzanine space would be very useful in terms of flexible space that we could use for either the ledge lounge, for all of the things that Ruth just said. I don't want to repeat them.
John,
I think someone was ahead of me.
Okay, Butch, and then John.
Thanks. Conversation seems to be, for me, seems to be taking two tracks, track and short-term track. And it sounded more to me like moving Ledge Council to Aiken would be part of the long-term track. So I say to myself, what do we need to do to get the legislature back in the building? What's the minimum things we need to do to get the legislature back in the building in January? And understanding that if we make a move today for this session, the upcoming session, we may have to destroy all the moves, but we're in the building for the next piece going forward on basically a major renovation within state government and the legislature. So I personally don't want to get sidetracked into the long-term conversation right now, because I think our time is so limited between now and August 15th that and understanding and hearing the morale issues and the resistance from Ledge Council, and I suspect we'll hear the same thing from operations and others. I'm not sure what we're going to hear from JFO because I don't think they're in the pot yet. So
They're right behind you.
yeah, I know.
They're
Waiting to get my ear pulled here.
They're in the pot.
Yeah. So I think we need to have the conversations of what's next. But I think for me, what's next is what's the minimum we can do to get the legislature back in the building by January 4th, or 3rd, or whenever and if we, that's enough.
And I want to move on to legislative operations.
I think there are a lot of intriguing possibilities for how we could use the space, but I don't see how we could even get a design, let alone anything built before our next session ends. So it doesn't make any sense to me to move them now. It's got to be a longer term plan. Talk about maybe putting committee rooms in there. Well, where would you put them? You'd have to knock down walls. That's a renovation right there. That's all I had to say.
Matt?
Sorry, Madam Chair, Matthew Romeo, Janet just sent me about 75 texts. So,
Is she listening?
yes.
She's supposed to be with family.
I believe she is vested in the process. So,
Janet.
I think in summary of what she's saying is that, this seems like it's a shell game that y'all are going to have to play about what's going where, because the things you do not currently have, coat room for the public or the members, a large or small meeting room, i.e. not 10 and 11.
That is if we use
If we use the
9,
current
10,
setup.
11, and the lounge for committee rooms, which we haven't decided yet.
That's how they're set up as it is. And, then really when you get down to it, there's capacity numbers and, take whatever capacity numbers you choose, whether it's ASHRAE or fire code, or we pull some numbers out of a hat. There's numbers attached to rooms and there's people on committees. And at some point in time, y'all have to make a recommendation of not necessarily what committee's going where, but maybe what type of committee's going where. And that seems to be the boiled down when you get down to it, is you have a certain number of assets and a certain number of lots, a certain number of keys, and figure out where they're going to go. But she is extremely concerned about the coat room, a legislative lounge, and I'm pretty sure she's going to sick me on Senator Benning if we bring up Senate Ag again.
Well, we could talk about sharing
All due respect.
Senate committee rooms.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, I can.
We're going to do that next week.
We'll take care
I
of it
figured you
next
might.
week.
And,
Let's do that next week and
I'll voice your
Can we
concern.
vote on it next week?
we're clear on his concerns.
So we're not at any point right now to make a decision about where to move Ledge Council.
When?
Or when. I think that really needs to get vetted. I do want to move on to legislative operations, which is a little different than our legislative council. So I'm going to turn it to
Mr. Sullivan,
Mike Ferrant.
we're supposed to go sit over there, but it'll just be easier to be here. Mike Ferrant, Director of Legislative Operations. So I'll start with, we have two main sections of operations. We have the administrative operational section, and then we have the committee services team, which is all the committee assistants with Peggy Delaney at the helm of that. Like I testified in Senate institutions this May, there was talk about moving us up to the mezzanine to make room for the copy room in our current location, which is out back by the loading dock door. I testified not in support of that. I think that we function efficiently as an open office accessible team that's centrally located. So where we are now, myself, Mariah Burke, who does our administrative assistant, who does payroll processing, as well as legislative report building and posting, Charlene Dindo, who does all the accounts payable and receivable for the legislature and staff's LCAR, and then Peggy Delaney, the supervisor of community services. The four of us being open, so not enclosed individual offices, but open the way that we are now and accessible to legislators, I think is critical. I don't think I can list all of the times and things that come to my desk with questions. Legislators just, it's like the information booth at the mall or in a busy hospital. People show up and they don't know where to start a process, and they start with me. And if I'm not there, they look back to Mariah or they look left to Peggy. So the four of us being central and being together and being open, I think is critical. Wherever that is, we can be flexible about, but I think in the State House is important. That's the administrative side. So I don't think putting us up in individual offices in the mezzanine would be effective for the legislature. If we stay where we are, I think that's great. If it's somewhere else central in the State House, I think that's fine too. We can certainly be somewhat flexible on that. The committee services team, we have in our exit interviewing, we do evaluation reviews with every committee assistant at the end of the session. And part of that this year has been Peggy and I have asked every committee assistant how they would feel about returning to work in the State House and what kinds of conditions they would expect and accept to come back and work in the State House as a committee assistant next session. We did a summary of some of their comments that I have here. So almost everyone said their comfort level would depend on the variance and where we are as a state as far as cases. So I think we're all in that agreement that if it stays the way it has, it keeps the trajectory that it has, things should be fine. Most people don't want to wear masks. Most committee assistant staff don't want to wear masks. A few have said they might still wear a mask depending on how many people would be allowed in their room at any given time. Many were concerned about the air quality at the State House, which we talked about a lot today. Most understood that, so the press and public being given access to the building, the amount of people that are in committee rooms, and if we think back to January 2020 mindset, February of 2020, those rooms were sardine cans, they were packed. And people are concerned about it returning to that level of congestion inside the room.
Was that more, Michael, I'm going to interrupt, was that more for committee assistants on the House side than the Senate side, or was it pretty consistent across the board?
I would call it consistent across the board. Yeah, I wouldn't say one side was more than the other. So we talked a lot, and Peggy and I talked.
Oh, there she is.
Yes. And Peggy and I talked very much about whatever state we return to the State House in, whatever conditions are put in place, rules, capacity limits of the room, masks, vaccinations, et cetera, whatever conditions we set, the committee assistant staff cannot and will not be the enforcer of those rules. We cannot put that on temporary staff or staff in general. And so part of my testimony is going to be more focused on, we're going to have some guidelines and some bumpers set up for how things operate. And who is going to be the enforcer of that? I see numbers on the airflow analysis of, so just picking it out of a hat, I don't think this is correct, but say a room has a capacity limit of 12 and there are 8 committee members. Well, now you have a committee assistant makes 9, an attorney giving testimony makes 10, a member of the public observing makes 11, and then a member of the press makes 12. Now you're at capacity. What happens when a senator wants to go into that room to observe what's going on because the bill might be going to their committee next? Or what happens if a police officer has to enter the room for any reason? Or 2 more members of the press want to come in and they have their news cameras on. Who is telling them that they can't enter the room? Or who is telling somebody else that they need to leave the room because now we're at capacity? I think these are questions that you really need to think about before that August 15th report. Who are the enforcers of whatever rules you impose? And I have to say, the committee assistant staff and the committee support team cannot, I don't think any staff should be put in that position. Telling a legislator or a member of the press or a member of the public that they can't come into a room or that they have to leave a room. That's not in any of our jobs. And it's not appropriate for any of us to do. Some suggestions that committee assistants had that would make them more comfortable or more confident coming back to work. So limit the amount of people that are allowed in each committee room. Again, we've talked about that. Who makes that call? Who makes that decision? Who enforces that? Allow witnesses to testify remotely. I think we've seen, that's been one of the benefits of Zoom to YouTube, is we've had more robust testimony from more places in Vermont and the world than I think you've ever had. So that ability to Zoom in and give testimony remotely, I think has been a real benefit that we shouldn't lose. We can. Take temperature checks and or require everyone from the public to wear a mask. Just suggestions for you to consider. Air purifiers in every committee room. And I don't know if purifier is technically, I'll leave that up to BGS, but whatever those air circulators are, whatever's going to improve that air quality, I think is important. Prohibit non-committee members from hanging out in committee rooms unless there is a committee meeting going on. So committee isn't meeting, the room is empty. All of a sudden it's a hotspot for private conversations. And so limiting that. Putting plexiglass between committee assistant and the rest of the room. So a plexiglass barrier between the committee assistant's workspace and the committee room. And the bottom suggestion you've already voted on was requiring all staff and legislators to be vaccinated. So you've already decided that. I think when we looked at Janet's 4 options, which I think is another part of this testimony that you wanted to hear, the enforcement piece becomes such a big deal. Senate committee sharing rooms, we both, and Peggy, tell me if I'm misspeaking, but we both thought that was almost impossible. Senators like to keep files. The Senate is much more paper driven than the House is. And so sharing a room means sharing files, means sharing desks. Committee assistants get so much work done during the committee meeting, before the committee meeting, after the committee meeting. They really need dedicated workspace. So you would have to have a dedicated workspace for that committee staff. So that's just, I think I'm curious to hear what that looks like, but it's really difficult to imagine right now. We start using multiple buildings, 109, State House, 133. I think you run into what Mike O'Grady was talking about with just getting lost and just time delays and what committee is where. I think there was an assumption made that if we use those 3 buildings, all these committee rooms, that we would group the committees by subject area. So you have the healthcare committees in one building, and you have appropriations committees in another building, or money committees in another building. You have, I would hope that would make sense. I don't know. Institutions, committees in a certain area, just grouped up so that Jen Carby isn't traveling. Well, you don't want Jen Carby or Katie McLean or anyone, Michael Grady, traveling across 3 different buildings because attorneys are based on subject area. And so they provide testimony in multiple buildings.
And in multiple committees.
And to multiple committees in the same day. And so it really brings us down to option 4, which I heard Senator Benning say that was kind of, it is the simplest option. Just go back to January 2020 mindset. But I do think you have to have some safety protocols in place. You have to have some rules and some boundaries that aren't like January or February of 2020. The pandemic had to teach us something. And I think that it came along and it displaced everyone. That's a good point that we all did that very quickly. I've said since March 13th that the hardest part about this is going to be coming back. Leaving and shutting down the State House was the easy part. And I was there with Kevin and Chief in the Operations Center launching Zoom meetings to YouTube. The very first couple of them, they were horrible. They were horrible. But coming back is going to be harder. It's going to be harder. It's going to be more difficult for people to be comfortable and confident in doing. So this committee is good. I'm glad you're meeting, and I hope you start talking about these things before August 15th about what that's going to look like. Peggy, do you have anything to add? You're muted. You're muted. Come on, rookie.
Sorry, guys. And I apologize for the red face. It's about 100 degrees here and I don't have AC. So I'm looking a little flush here, but anyway, Peggy Delaney, Community Services Supervisor. I think Mike did a really good job of recapping the feedback that we got from the committee assistants. From my perspective, I think, I'd like to echo sort of what Mike O'Grady said as far as the level of service being in separate buildings. That's something that definitely would concern me. I think that this year, that's one of the things that was really lacking with committee services. Supervising people in different places will be challenging. We do a lot of collaborative work together, especially with new committee assistants. So to be in different buildings, that would be challenging. But I also would reiterate that we absolutely need our own dedicated workspace. I mean, when we're in the committee meeting, our job is to pay attention as much as possible to the committee meeting of what's going on and be there for the chair. So we do a lot of the work, not when the committee is meeting. And it's really important that we have our own workspace. Ideally, I would love us all to be in the State House with safety protocols, limit the amount of people that are able to come to the building, and make staff and legislators the priority, at least for next session. And also to reiterate what Mike said about we cannot be the enforcer of any guidelines that you guys come up with. I think that's it for me.
Okay, questions?
Again, for baby step purposes, I think we should immediately come to the conclusion and make a recommendation. It's the responsibility of chairs to oversee whatever rules and regulations are put in place for committee room capacity, not the committee assistants. Peggy, I'm sort of disappointed you weren't as colorful with this committee in your description of sharing Senate rooms and committee assistants having to work two in a room as you were with me. I thought that was much more colorful. And
I think it's a really bad idea. I won't say what I said to Senator Benning in this room, but I think it's a really, really bad idea. And I think that it's really important that committee assistants, we have our own dedicated workspace if you want us to continue the level of service that you are accustomed to.
What about the House Committee of Assistants?
I just want to close out with you, Peggy, that the suggestion of sharing space seems to be coming from people who have not actually chaired committees. And I would really hope that if this committee is going to discuss this further, that committee chairs have an opportunity to testify about that suggestion. And finally, Peggy, if you don't have any aloe at home, I would highly recommend you run out and get some. Fellow Middletown, New Jersey resident, you and I have the same problem and.
Holy mackerel, I am just like, it's really warm here and I'm going on a boat in a few minutes and I
wear a hat.
Cooler
on the ocean.
I hope so.
Ruth?
So I have a question for I think for Mike. So what I heard from your testimony is we need more space in order to limit the number of people in rooms and to provide the most sort of flexible, appropriate workspace. And you all would prefer to stay where your offices are, your staff, your direct staff. Committee assistants don't want us to share committee rooms based on this whole exchange we just had. And the easiest option is to just go back to what we did before, but what we did before doesn't accommodate all the other things that a need for a new space. So, and you don't want to work in a bunch of different locations. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around, it seems like we're in a catch-22. If staff don't want to move out of the building and people don't want to work in multiple spaces, and we need more space in the building. I mean, I wish we were Harry Potter where we could just create these rooms that we could all go into, but can you guys do that at BGS?
Harry Potter.
Yeah, maybe you could work on that. But I just, do you hear what I'm saying? I'm just trying to figure out this conundrum and it feels unworkable because there are too many doors that say, no, we can't go through that one.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that. And I think that the transformation that Kevin and the staff have done with rooms 10, 11, the lounge and the coat room have given you that extra committee space. And I think in one of Janet's option, she had talked about using 109 or 133, the spaces that we've acquired for those, like this, for the bigger committee meetings like we used to have in room 10 or room 11, the multi-joint committees or the public hearings or something along those lines. I agree, you're still missing the coat room. You still don't have a coat room or a lounge. I don't know what to do about that. I won't pretend to, but I do hear what you're saying about the conundrum. I think that
I drew it all.
just looking at the options that were put in front of us, those were our reactions to them.
And just to clarify, I heard a little bit of hesitation on your staff, you want to be together in an open, accessible space.
I think you benefit from that.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think, are you wedded to where you are right now, or are you flexible on moving?
Very flexible.
As long as it meets those criteria?
Yeah, I think so. I've talked pretty openly about how we can, I think it's important to the legislators, that we be together and centrally located or accessible. I think you benefit from it. We would all love our own offices with a door we could shut, but I don't think it would benefit you. So, and we like that. We like that open atmosphere. We like the centrally located and accessible. We like our jobs like that. We like to be kind of bouncing off of each other.
Okay.
How many, you're talking about your administrative, what I would call your administrative staff. How many are there of you?
So there's 4. I kind of count Shadi in there as well. Used to be Brandon, but I count Shadi as part of that group too, because somebody comes and they've got an iPad and they've got a payroll question and they've got something else. So yeah, I would say there's 4, maybe 5 of us.
So if there was open, accessible space somewhere else for 4 people or 5 people, is that what we're talking about? 4 people?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to understand what it is. Okay.
4 or 5.
Yep.
I have a question. Steve Fry, BGS. And maybe it's just more of a general question. It's kind of speaking about, it's almost like would you be willing to try something for a short time type of question for a limited duration of the next session and see where we end up at the end of it and kind of become more informed about things after having done it. Because I do think what I mean by that is there could be some really interesting opportunities to move some functions from the State House to and maybe ways to do things in the State House that are transformative, building on some of the exciting ways that you figured out how to do stuff in the last 15 months together. Maybe we don't have all the answers, but would it be possible, or would you be willing as teams, providing all these critical services, to be open to some different ideas, even if it's just a short-term kind of approach? Because I think that a lot of times it's easier to do things when it's more of a pilot rather than this is really real forever, but it's more of a short-term kind of thing. It's more of a general question.
to deal with and live through and live through it, knowing that a full solution to our space challenges, which are severe, is around the corner. It's not, this is coming our way. We have known since I first served on the State House Committee in 2005 that we needed to do another expansion. And COVID has just underscored that and illustrated its need more explicitly, I think. So, but until we're all willing to at least think about this, not as necessarily a full-time solution, but perhaps an interim solution, until we design a full solution, we're going to be stuck just doing the same thing. And I don't know if that's really where we want to end up, but I don't know, maybe that's where we want to end up.
I believe my administrative team, the four of us, is probably the most flexible about moving to a different location if that's what is decided.
Within the State House.
Yeah,
We don't want to be outside of the State House.
I don't think you would benefit from us being outside of the State House. But somewhere in the State House, if there's another space, I think that works. The only other caveat I will add is that we maintain the personnel files for 3 different offices and all of the legislators. So we have file cabinets that are locked up to have everyone's personnel files. We'll have to find a space for those. But otherwise, that space that we're in is fairly large and has huge furniture in it. And I think that we like change. We're all about change. You can try to convince Charlene of that, and I will. But but that was my testimony. That was where I wanted to kind of end up.
Thank you.
Great line from Marie. Without change, we wouldn't have any butterflies.
What movie?
Okay, anything else from Mike before we move on to joint fiscal office with Catherine Benham? Why don't you sit here? Welcome.
Thank you. I am, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office. We do not serve all the committees. Legislative Council serves all the committees. We serve a subset of the committees. We try to serve the other committees as needed, but we have a little smaller purview. We do all the money issues, and we work in One Baldwin. One Baldwin is the Pink Lady next to the State House, so we have to walk back and forth. Most of us share offices. The ones that don't are because they're in tiny offices, but we share offices. So that's another piece of it. It probably serves us well that we share offices because we really do need to interact. We want to make sure we're not spending any more money than we are raising. So that's it's a lot of teamwork in that process, but it is noisy. I'll just emphasize, I can appreciate people wanting some peace and quiet, and Zoom has actually allowed some of us to have some peace and quiet at home in a way that we haven't had in office. But I would think we all miss some of that camaraderie and teamwork. We are also hiring. We're replacing, I don't know how many of you know Dan Smith, who is our IT consultant. And we will either replace him with a person or a staff person or a consultant. And we're also hiring another revenue person. So we have an extra 1 to 2 bodies coming into our space, and we don't have room for them. Arlene Donovan is in our building, who's the new HR director, and she's hiring another person, and there is no place to put that person right now. So there is, and Ledge Council, I don't know what their plans are. I know they're hiring, I know they're replacing, but I think they're also adding on to their staff. I don't know, I haven't discussed what their plans are, but there are some immediate pressing needs that are coming up sooner rather than later and need to be addressed. And I don't have a good answer. Arlene is probably moving the fastest. And so she's going to have a person on board hopefully soon. And I really don't know where they're going to physically sit. And it would be nice if they were near her. But those are some of the logistics. This is less to deal with, COVID or the pandemic, and more to deal with just space needs and logistics that we have. As far as coming back, I would guess in our office, we're all back on Wednesdays now. We have an in-office staff meeting. We're going to go to 3 days a week. We're expecting to be in person at the committee's meeting. That's what we have told our staff so far. And I'm actually hope there's a room for when people are sick, but like have a cold and would work. I would rather have them not breathing on me like we've talked about. So maybe they'll wear masks, or maybe they can Zoom in. But the other interesting thing was, I think Representative Ansel said last time, it was interesting to be in a hybrid room. And I know there's new technology and better technology, but it is if you're not in, if everybody else is in the room and you're not, it feels very different than having everybody on Zoom. And so I'm not quite sure also how the hybrid, how it's going to work well. I hope it does work well, but it's just, it was a different feel watching it last week, and you felt it. So it's not, but I do also like having witnesses be able, we have people from all over the world testify. You could also, by the way, jump from committee to committee without having to,
yes,
which is good and bad, but it did make it easier to go from committee to committee if you're not dealing with logistics.
We got less exercise, though.
We did get less exercise.
All of us.
So I guess in some, we're in the Pink Lady, we have staff needs that are coming up, and I don't have a great solution to them right now.
Janet?
Maybe this is a question for Mike, but how many lawyers, legislative council people are in the Pink Lady right now?
There are 6, I
6,
believe.
okay.
Yeah.
All in private offices.
All in private office. Some of them are very small, some are not small.
Yeah.
Some of, there's a few that are big and some that are very small that you would only ever put one person in.
Yeah.
2 are on the second floor and 4 on the top floor. And there's, I see Mike O'Grady's. Okay.
Is he gonna weigh in? You weighing in, Michael?
No, I'm not. I think 6 is correct.
6. Okay. Questions for Catherine? We have a conundrum.
It does beg the question, if you have expanded needs, I mean, Ledge Council has grown into your space, but is that your space? I mean, does that mean you guys get the priority in terms of if people are, we're going to have to find inevitably more space for our Ledge Council? I think it sounds that way. And now our additional legislative staff, Arlene, who does Arlene report to, the committee?
See.
Right.
Right, no, it's an ongoing pressure.
Right, that's why
Yeah, that's right. You need to have these conversations and figure out, and there's a short-term issue and then there's a long-term issue. And you have to also weigh in about what is the role of the legislature? I don't know, if you get into the big picture, 5 or 10 years down the road, what do you want? How do you maintain your role at the table with the governor as an equal branch and making sure you have the resources you need that are appropriate?
Made the decision to put HR with you.
There was an empty, we moved somebody out of a bigger space and gave it. That's how we made it work.
If she had to move elsewhere, do you then have space for the people you're bringing in?
We do.
Yeah, it strikes me that that's the.
Well, only if we hire, right, if we hire, yeah. Or we could double up, maybe we could also double up more in our offices.
If they hire.
So you have been walking back and forth, obviously, unless you have a secret tunnel or a Harry Potter thing. And as this is my first session on a money committee and it wasn't really the same. So do you find that problematic, or is your staff able to deal with it?
Well, so we don't know any different. I would just say that we've been there. And so we make it work. The answer is probably the lawyers in the State House get a lot more, not that many people come to the Pink Lady. A few legislators stop by, especially if they're parking there on that side and they walk by. Most of the time, we go meet people in someplace in the State House. So that requires you, I'm carrying our paperwork. We have further to go. I'm sure it will be a change for them if they lose that. But we do, my shoes, I go through a pair of shoes in the winter because you're walking through the slush.
Yeah. Right. And then also when you're testifying, kind of like what Michael's doing right now, and everyone who's on the committee is in the same room, but the person who's testifying is remote. That seems to work really quite well. You don't feel like excluded because you're so like if JFO were testifying, but not, I don't know if that's a different thing, but it seems to me that that works better than.
If you're asking me, I would say it's probably better, but it's still not the same because, you can interact, you can slip people notes, that you can't do in the same way. You can also catch somebody in a break and catch up on, even if it's a different topic, even not the topic committee. So You lose that, you gain other things. I don't want to dispute that, but it is easier for you. Well, I'm just tell you also watching, I don't know if you all watched the YouTube from last week. I did because I wasn't here, and it was interesting to watch it and watch the dynamics of just people testifying. It's just a little different. It's not the end of the world, but I think.
I can make a plug as a chair of a committee. After you've heard testimony, where you take a break, the chairs of committees quite often have further conversations with their legal staff, which one is going. It's really important to have that person available. Our work as chair is a different level, and on our staff, our joint fiscal, and our lawyers. That's when you can process and testify to what committee members have said and kind of work through language or work through a path that you need to go with the committee. I found on Zoom, it was really, really difficult to have those conversations with the staff people that I needed to at that time and not have to wait an hour or two.
And I'd also say, as a former staff person, you learn things by being in the room. Your work. You are not going to learn if you're watching on Zoom or you're participating on Zoom. As a witness, I think Zoom is fine.
Yeah. That's what I meant.
Not as
Yeah.
a staff person.
Yeah.
Staff.
No, I agree. I think.
Huh?
Try doing all that. If you have to share your-
You can share your rooms. Share your rooms.
I think
So in the old days,
we all pride ourselves on being nimble and flexible.
anything else for Catherine here? Okay, thank you. Kevin, were you up to testify on
I'm
much?
happy to do so, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I think my testimony will be brief.
Okay, come on up.
All right.
Because you're in another building too.
We are.
Yeah.
So for the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT. We probably are the least impacted.
Before you get started, Joe does have a commitment at 4:00, a very important commitment
Oh, yeah.
for Harley Davidson,
Becca, they're going shopping.
for Becca.
Kevin and I have spent a lot of time together and Kevin's problem has been solved.
Addressed.
For the moment.
Not on the timeline I would have preferred, but it has been solved.
Well, have a great next
you
2
all.
weeks.
Good luck in
Safe travels.
the week.
Yes, safe travels. We won't make too many decisions while you're gone.
Oh, don't promise
Just all
anything.
the big ones.
Don't promise him anything.
You're back. Take care.
Institutions and GovOps are going to be like this.
So, Kevin, it's all yours.
All right. Legislative IT's been out of the State House. Our primary office has been out of the State House for a couple of years now. I think fall of 18, fall of 18. We moved out of the State House down to 9 Baldwin Street. So we're a bit further removed than the Pink Lady. We also go through a pair of shoes each winter, if not 2, depending on the salt being used. The current space we're in is less than ideal, but it was better than what we had in the State House at that point in time. And we have since worked with BGS in the institutions committees, and our new space will be coming to us soon, hopefully soon, in the 133 State Street building, first floor. So as far as short-term needs, I think we're okay. We do have a staff hire that we're looking to make in the near future. We do have space for that person currently. Our offices are socially distant as they're currently set up, even the space that is shared by more than one person. The rest of the time, we're running from room to room, from problem to problem, and probably, as is probably no surprise, IT folks are a little different than others. And we are more nimble with the technology and appreciate being able to use technology to solve problems rather than always having to be in person. From a committee perspective, committee process perspective, we think Zoom is a great supplemental tool, but it's supplemental. It should not be the primary tool for committee process unless everybody's on that same piece. Hybrid is the most difficult one to accommodate. You lose body language, These microphones have incredible sound quality, by the way. We can hear keyboards, we can hear paper shuffling, you can hear whisper conversations. You hear great. But because you hear all of that, sometimes you miss the conversation. And that's the challenge that we face in that hybrid model. It's one of those challenges. Field of view, as you can see at the end here, that's another challenge.
Right.
As far as timeline goes for implementation, our largest concern is where, not who, not how, but where. Where are we going to be in January? Because then we can start really figuring out how to integrate the technology into those committee rooms, wherever they happen to be. But where is critically important for us to understand in order to get there. The longer we wait on a where, even if it's tentative, the harder it's going to be for us to make sure that that technology is available for the beginning of session.
How many staff are you now, Kevin?
So we're about a 7 1/3 FTE. So we have.
Including Shadi, I assume.
We're including.
Yeah, okay, you don't let him go so quickly.
So we're.
Okay.
So Shadi is very much IT, but he certainly sits in the legislative operations space currently. That's where the help desk has been. That's the way we've always done it. That's where he currently resides. If things shift, things shift. Copy room's also included in that count, and our session-only position, which is obviously during this session. Bringing on a web developer hopefully in the near future. Unemployment challenges.
So the second part of my question is who's taking the space at 9 Baldwin Street?
So that would be up to the BGS
It's up to
ultimately.
institutions committee.
Yes, I think the original intent is to offload that property and sell it.
Is it the Brown Building?
It's the green building.
Oh, right.
The green building. So it's the fourth to last on the right as you're heading out. Two from Pink Kennedy, yeah.
It's a residential home that was converted into office space like many of the buildings on that street. So it's inefficient, it's old. You need to dump a bunch of money into it.
We need to do that with
space.
Our other former residences that are currently functioning as office space.
These particular buildings are really obsolete.
This one's pretty rough. It works, but it's pretty rough.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, a lot of the space in 133 is temporary. Is that right?
Well, it depends. The temporary pieces are the
Basement, right. I guess my question is the space that you're moving into
It's
is
permanent.
Permanent.
Yeah,
It
that's
is permanent.
He's on the
was
first
really my-
floor.
They're permanent.
So
and he's permanent.
some of the space in 133 is permanent and some of it is temporary.
His space, first floor, is permanent.
And the storage and build
The
space.
storage and the
classroom
training
space.
classroom in the basement.
We're really excited about
You are
both.
excited.
Kevin got a good deal.
He did. Kevin did.
Right now, we're excited.
That conference room, training room is part of the permanent deal.
Yes. And across the hallway, there's storage room that's permanent.
Shadi's been counting the days until he can get into that storage and build space. The
Okay, thank you.
ecstatic would be an understatement for him.
So any other questions?
Oh, it sounds like you are actually
We're doing okay.
golden for the
We
moment.
just need to know where.
Yeah, we have to
Where
figure
for
out.
January.
What do you,
Anyone
where
who's
for
happy.
whom? For
Yes.
us?
Us in
Okay.
January, so they can.
Not for
figure out.
you, but for us.
Not for us, for the legislature as a whole, specific to, is a room a committee room? Is a room a meeting room? Is a room an office? Who occupies that space?
You don't care. You
Don't
just,
really care. I mean,
Well,
we do.
do you care about how it's going to be used?
What overflow is.
And overflow is a challenge too, depending on what decisions are made for capacity. But we'll have to address that when capacity.
Anything else for Kevin?
I don't think this is a technology question, but talking about capacity, I've been thinking during the conversation that Hunger Mountain Co-op has a little, I think you've seen it probably, Anthony and David, you have the little capacity thing when you walk into Hunger Mountain Co-op, it says capacity is 33 and 2 more people can enter. Is that it's not very sophisticated, but it would be interesting to think about having something at a committee room so that the chair who's having to say we're full, there's at least something there, and people are sort of on their honor system at the co-op. If it says nobody can enter, You know, you don't walk.
You notice the line? I mean, because we have the same thing at our farmer's market. It's capacity.
I'm sure that, I don't know what the technology is, and I don't know whether it presents itself as some kind of a solution, but I just have it in my mind as we've been talking about the capacity issues.
The majority of that question, and
Okay.
then I'm going to defer to Chief for filling in the blanks here. So the first part of it is it available? Does it work? Is it something we can get into? Yes, we're already there. So we do have a bit of capacity counting capability that's new to the legislature that we were using as an anticipation of a hybrid session. So getting that data to an iPad display or something of that nature outside a committee room is not impossible. It's certainly something we can get to. It comes with a bit of cost, but we can figure that part out. As far as the operational aspect and how to divvy up the building, divvy up the spaces, and assign capacities, I very much am going to defer to Chief on that one and let him answer that part.
Go ahead.
So we, last year, put people counters on the Lincoln door and the loading dock door. We have them specified for the rest of the exterior doors. Now, some of them much easier than others. East and west doors, cakewalk. Front door, not so easy. Primarily because of the construction of the building and how do we get wires to where that little device needs to be. You walk down the Lincoln hallway, you'll see them in the ceiling. They're about that big. And we also put one on the lobby end of the Lincoln hallway because we were anticipating those rooms being those overflow large committee or small committee rooms, depending on if we used COVID numbers or not. Some of those are a little more whiz-bangy than others, if you will. Those count heads. And one of the things that we were thinking about was the fourth grade class coming in the door. Because you've got 70 fourth graders, stacked up in front of each other. They're going to register as one in a standard beam break type thing. So we're counting heads as they go through the door. It's really neat. And we utilized Pledge IT to help us through that process. We probably should put the rest of them in. Didn't put them in the east and west doors. We didn't put them in the opposite side of the arch and the infirmary and the front door. We kind of held back on that because we can determine occupancy. And there's a whole other conversation about how I know David would love to know exactly how many people come into the State House every year. So would we, because it gives us an idea of what we're doing in the general public stuff. But what's the number?
We don't know.
And that's the thing we have to noodle through. So we have numbers based on those airflow standards for each space in the State House. And we have little signs for them on the outside of the door. And to the point of the committee room, and this is what I was speaking with about.
Representative Shaw?
God, thank you, sorry. that one of the breaks, there's an idea in a room like a committee room that you might adopt a butt-in-seat rule. So there's X number of seats in the room and there's no standing room. So that's an option that you have. Adopt something along those lines. And whatever it is, I can tell you, speaking on behalf of the Capitol Police and Sergeant at Arms Office, whatever it is, we just want clear instructions. And if we don't, speaking the royal we as the legislative branch, if we don't apply them consistently, content neutrally, and across the board, we will be in trouble. So whatever that is that the three rules committees, if you will, sign off on, and everyone agrees that we're going to do that, then I think we would be good. A caveat being, I'm not an attorney, didn't stay in the Holiday Inn Express last night, but from what we deal with dealing with crowd management and things such as that, it's got to be consistent, content neutral across the board, fairly applied. And whatever that number is, we'll put that number on the door and bam, we're good to go. So those numbers on the individual doors and spaces, then we would coalesce that up to a building capacity. And then we would be able to understand when we're approaching that. Because we have live displays of this data now. Very intriguing.
Question about the capacity, and this is maybe a question for you, Commissioner. Is there a different capacity limit for fire code and safety? And is it higher or lower?
No, take a question.
Even come close to meeting it? Sorry, Butch, but I'm just curious. We're talking about safety codes.
Code study has not been done, probably for a number of years since the last renovation was put on. And it's give or take on any given day. But it's not only, it's the building as a whole when you look at things. So you can have a larger group over here on the eastern side of the building and hardly anybody in the western side, and then you're still in compliance. So it's not an easy, here's a specific number.
It's not room by room, it's building wide.
As a whole, yes. There are different things when you go into a room for other life safety issues on, whether it's a second means of egress and the likes of that. But I mean, all that would take into account if we looked at it as a whole. And I don't recall what the total number can be in that facility.
Okay, but it's not a room by room. It's not like you look at the House chamber and say, this is how many people fit in this room because of fire.
If you look at the House chamber for fire and whatnot, because of the number of people, you need the number of exits.
Okay.
That does come into account.
It does.
It does, yes.
And actually, it's posted in the House chamber. And it's posted in the Senate chamber, I believe, above I think there's a number, isn't there a number listed?
Yeah, the numbers are listed and the Sergeant at Arms is aware of all the numbers as they existed the last time someone gave them numbers. Right, yeah.
Those don't extend to the individual committee rooms because, quite frankly, we've kicked this around with the fire marshal. And, Representative Shaw and I both live in the fire service as well, and they'll tell you that, calculating capacity from a fire code standpoint, extremely complex on a building like that because it's based on exits and stairwells and you have to accumulate all the way up to what's coming from one particular door. And the honest answer to that is the committee rooms, you can't put enough people in there to beat the square foot per person rule. You would be crammed on top of each other because of the furniture.
Oh, I see.
So that's why when we talked with our local fire marshal, Deputy State Fire Marshal, he said the best thing you can do is adopt a butt and seat rule and make no standing room. The other thing that's very interesting when you start talking about this is hallways don't count. And if you've been there for a public hearing, we end up with a ridiculous number of people crammed in that bottom hallway. There's no capacity number for the hallway because it's meant to be transient space. So it's very odd. That's why some of the biggest public hearings we have, anytime y'all are going to talk about guns or that stuff, the Deputy State Fire Marshal would come down and stand next to us and go, okay, I think we're full, because that's literally the judgment call that has to be made when you can no longer effectively move through a crowd. Okay, now your space is full. But there are numbers for the big rooms. There are numbers for 10 and 11 in the House and the Senate chamber.
Right.
We know how they break out because we do it twice a year with the inauguration and the budget address of how many can go in the balcony and that. And we Sergeant at Arms Office controls those numbers, but those individual committee rooms, it's going to come back, and I'll say it again, content neutral, clear, fair across the board, consistent enforcement is the only way we don't get in trouble with it.
It's 4:00, folks, a little bit after. And we didn't get through the whole agenda. Thank you, Kevin. I know that there was an update from BGS on some
The survey.
through some of the maps, that type of thing. And also I want to spend some time here really figuring out what we're going to do for meetings over the next 3 weeks. And I would recommend a meeting a week. This is topics that it's really, really difficult to be away for 2 weeks and come back. We need the continuity. And I don't know if we pick one day a week that we meet, maybe the 3 hours is not sufficient. Maybe we need to go from 10 to 3:30. I know it's summertime, but we do have our recommendations.
Or 1 to 4, it would be great to have morning or afternoon, but not.
I'm putting all options out so the committee can figure out what works because we have a lot of work ahead of us. For our recommendations to be ready by August 15th. Time is, and we didn't get through everything on our agenda today, unless you want to spend a little bit of time with BGS.
So the BGS update was going to be the update on the surveys and the interviews?
Well, they're not completed yet.
Right, right.
Oh, okay, so that'll be next meeting?
It certainly could be. And I think the other thing that we wanted to do, and I think we're running out of energy, frankly, to potentially do it, you know, I'm willing to stick around, but was to get impressions from everyone that went on the tour. And, you know, I know that I spoke with you, or many of you, not everyone as of yet, but, you know, getting impressions after having taken the tour may have changed some of the way that you were either doing the survey or answering some of the interview questions, just because you may have had some fresh observations from the walkabout. And
Yeah, because we do have the maps up there.
Yep.
That was one thing that members asked for, the maps, so that maybe we can visually see if we moved X amount over here, how does that play on all the things?
So could we just email you our impressions? Because I have some impressions after not only the tour, but after this discussion in terms of as it relates to space. Or do you want to have that just publicly as we?
You know, if there's ways to accelerate the process, I defer to the group, you know.
Well, I think we've heard today some of the moving pieces, and I think we really need to process that as a committee in terms of there are logistics if we have committees offsite. And what are those logistical problems? What are the pros and cons?
Yep.
We've seen, you know, the sites are there. Do we move Ledge Council over to 2 Aiken for this coming January? And what do you gain and what do you lose? I mean, I think we're at the point of having to make some of these decisions that, and I don't know if you get to make a decision. Are we at the point of figuring out our ASHRAE issue? We figured out the vaccination issue. But the ASHRAE, how is that going to be our driving force to make a decision on how we come back into the building or come back in the building with 109 and 133?
Which are only a 1-year solution.
We are only talking right now, our August 15th report, we talked about this last week, would be focusing on January, not the long term.
Right.
So mine is January, not the long term. That's a further conversation. Our immediate need is August 15th for how we come back in January.
One thought that came to my mind that was just hearing all the conversations and testimony was that in some ways the airflow conversation, do we or don't we, also might relate to do we or don't we possibly relocate Ledge Council and some of those operations to 2 and 4 Aiken, because if we don't really do if we step away from doing the airflow choice, then, do we really need to make the move choice temporarily for 2 and 4 Aiken? The heat is off on that as much. But there may be more short-term mitigation tools or things that are the policies and procedures. The thing that you said, Matt, very eloquently, like create very consistent, easy to, work with tactical solutions. That may be an end result of this. But I think those two things go together potentially. But I'm not sure if others have the same impression.
Would it help the committee, just putting this as a question, would it help the committee at our next meeting, we really figure out January, do we come back and do all of our committee work in the building? And use 109 and 133 as overflow to replace room 10, room 11, for those times when there's a public hearing, for those times when there may be joint committee meetings, or for those times that a committee may have a topic that afternoon that they're taking testimony that's going to bring a lot of people in, and normally we would go to room 10 or room 11 or even Ethan Allen when that was available. With that, if we can get to a place where maybe we can say, okay, this is our goal, and what needs to take place to achieve that goal. Would that work for next meeting to try to vet? Do we try to stay in the building for all the committees, or are we going to spread the committees out?
I think that part of that goes to what Stephen just said, which is you have to decide about whether you're going to embrace the best practices standard on air. I think it all goes from there. And if we decide to fly in the face of that and just do everything we've been doing, we can tread water until we do a long-term solution. I mean, or if we decide we want to embrace best practices and make people feel a little bit more comfortable about air quality and airflow and everything else, we'll probably want to make some changes. But I think we have to make that decision first in a way.
I think that the consideration about the issue of how we configure things is more than about the airflow. Yeah. And so, I mean, the building was not going back to comfortable, right. Not a comfortable place to work.
In what way wasn't it comfortable?
It wasn't comfortable because it didn't have enough space. It wasn't comfortable because there were times when I was in my committee room and I literally could not exit that room. I would have to climb over the table or ask everyone else to leave.
Right.
You were in there with me, and I didn't feel safe for a number of reasons in that committee room.
More claustrophobic.
It was claustrophobic, and if I needed to leave for whatever reason, like if I needed to use the bathroom, if I needed to take a phone call, if I felt sick to my stomach, whatever it was, I could not leave that room without the Senadag room. So that's not the only room. The House committee rooms are similar. Some of the other Senate rooms, I was also in Senate Education, that room got really full. When you're discussing Act 46, everybody's crowded in there, and it was uncomfortable. It made me not comfortable in my space, and I was having to make important decisions on behalf of public, and I didn't feel safe. And so this was pre-COVID, and it didn't have anything to do with the air. It had to do with the space that around me. And I think there are other people who feel that way. There's an extreme lack of privacy. If I needed to have a private conversation with someone, a colleague or my kid on the phone or whatever it was, I either had to leave the building or find a space. There are just so many things that make it an uncomfortable place to work. And we all do important work, and we should have a comfortable place to work. So I think it's more about air than about the air. And if there are things that we can do to make things more comfortable and safer, first safe and then more comfortable for next session, then we should do it.
Janet?
I guess, it seems to me that there's a middle ground, that we don't have to go with the numbers on that sheet, which I don't have next to me, but you've all seen it. We don't have to wed ourselves to these, but we can also make things better.
Yeah.
And I would like to have us think of ways that we can do that. And all the things that you're saying about space and sort of our ability to work, the lack of privacy, it's all a problem.
Yeah.
And, it may be that the current circumstances have given us an opportunity to make some of it better. And the fact that we might be able to make it better, but we can't make it perfect, doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Right.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Butch, and then Janet's voice over there.
I agree with Janet that we need to force ourselves maybe from this piece of paper, the capacity with the airflow. It's something that we really can't cure between now and January. We can improve, I'm sure, but I don't think we can cure it, but we're aware of it and we're working on the issue. I think we can make the building more comfortable with some minor changes within the building. Minor to me, maybe not minor to other people like David, but it could be some minor changes so that we're more comfortable working in the building. And I think the decision points, Alice, that you brought out for the next meeting are the most important decision points that we need to make for our August 15th report. And I think it's going to take more than a 3-hour meeting to do it. I think it's going to take probably most unfortunately for that one, most of the day to get through this and start some semblance of movement on our report. By the way, who's going to write the report?
Well, I've reached out to Michael O'Grady to find out if we have any legislative council staff. I've spoken with Catherine Benham a little bit, spoken with Stephen Fry a little bit. We're trying to work that through.
Sure. So, thank you. So I think the next meeting, concentrate on those decision points, listen to Stephen's assemblage of all of our comments that he made, and I think then we can move forward. But I really think for this session, the airflow capacity rates are unfortunately not attainable anywhere in the building, other than maybe some selected Senate rooms. And I think another discussion we need to have is what is acceptable capacity in a committee room? Is it everybody you can squeeze through the door, or is it everybody you can sit in the committee room? And when that's full, it's full. And reasonable people, I think, would have to agree with us that that's a reasonable solution to everybody standing on top of everybody else while they're testifying. But then the next question is for Kevin, what do we do with somebody that wants to listen in? How can that happen? It's currently beyond my purview. It's in my purview, but it's not, I'm not willing to make that decision.
Janet.
Okay. Speaking somewhat to what Representative Shaw just mentioned about divorcing from the airflow guidelines, when we went around to all the committee rooms, we took airflow, override airflow, and then what we thought could physically fit into a committee room. And that's what the lowest of those numbers is what we, in theory, assigned to a room for discussion purposes. The unfortunate reality of that is there is no physical way to accommodate 14 House committees in the State House unless you repurpose multiple Senate committee rooms. And I am not refereeing that fight. That's the reality of it. The other reality that's very important to remember is even if you decide to use these rooms in the fourth floor conference room, and the basement of 133, and the fourth floor of 133, and we do all this spreading out, the biggest thing that might accomplish for you is that you regain 11 and the legislative lounge. There is no room anywhere in this portfolio that will hold as many people as room 11 and the lounge, with the exception of the chambers. So when you're talking about a joint committee of any size, with any number of public attendees, if you assign room 11 and the lounge as a committee room, you've lost that.
Right.
So now you're going to one of the two chambers, or perhaps the Snelling room, or the Pavilion Auditorium, which is a whole nother discussion. So just think about, as you go through your legislative year, how many times have you had a public hearing or a joint committee hearing in room 11 that you were able to accommodate? Now, granted, right now, the number is a third of what it was then in either room 11 or the legislative lounge.
If we abide by the best practices.
You abide by the best practices.
Right. So
that's what it boils down. I also think there's a great middle ground. I mean, we could come up with a whole other set of numbers if you wanted to. We could sit down with, Commissioner Fitch as an industrial hygienist, right?
Yes, he has a baby and just had a baby and is out on leave, but I'm sure we could snag him part-time.
So, I mean,
if
we
needed
could
to.
grab him and maybe me and maybe somebody from the fire marshal's office and a couple other people, and we could throw numbers against the wall and see what happens. But tick-tock, that August 15th clock is ticking awfully loud. So there's commentary.
John?
I think exploring the possibility of putting committees into this building makes a lot of sense to me. But one thing that came up that struck me last week is the issue of what happens if there's a roll call. And there's got to be a way to solve that. And I think we're going to need to spend a little bit of time thinking about that. Is there a way we can have a committee in here and get members over if they need to be over? Because it really limits our options if we have to keep all the committees in the State House building. That was the most striking thing from last week for me is, so how would, there's got to be a way to fix that.
Well, the most striking thing to me, in terms of talking about putting committee rooms in 109 or 133, is the pressure it's going to put on Capitol Police for security. And because that will then be under their jurisdiction. And the other thing coming into 109, it's a more secure building than 133.
Yeah.
You have to get clearance. You got more logistics. It's going to be harder for Ledge Council, what we heard today, of going from building to building with our legal staff. Joint fiscal will be in that. Then you're talking IT. We'll have to do more setup. I mean, those are the things that I'm piecing together, putting standing committees in these rooms.
Anthony.
I mean, having, not just for the roll call, for other reasons as well. To me, one of the operating principles I would have is that standing committees stay in the State House.
Yeah.
That whatever we end up designing for January, the standing, and that helps me get rid of some other decisions. If we make that decision, then that drives some other possibilities. But I think standing committees need to stay in the State House. Joint committees may be different, public hearings, I don't care where they are, but
It's the nature of how we operate, working with our colleagues. Anthony and then Ruth.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm just going to be confirming what other people have said. I think in the short term, I think we need to not worry about the airflow numbers short term. And I think that we need to I feel like I'm being really overly conservative about this whole thing, but I feel like we should make as few changes as possible. Have the committees stay in the State House and not scatter things around too much, because we're going to have long-term discussions that'll affect those things as well. And I think in the short term, I'd like to see us do as little as possible, because I feel like we run the risk of making some quick decisions that are going to be permanent changes that will change the way we do business And I like the way we do business. So I don't want to change it too much, and we've been doing it because of a virus, a disease, whatever you want to call it, that hopefully it's not going to be as much of a problem. I know people could dispute that, but I think if we're coming out of it, I'd hate to see us make a lot of changes that we regret making because we made them for that reason. I think that we need to continue to let hybrid uses of Zoom for testimony and whatnot is important as well. And I think if we were going to use any other building, I don't know, going on the tour, I mean, I thought this space, these spaces in this building seemed okay. Except for what John just said about the moving, roll call votes and things like that. I could stomach using this building a bit. The tax building, I just found really problematic. I don't know why. It was
depressing. It's a word I use.
Yeah, it's depressing. I felt like we're going to hang out in the basement,
The basement just is, yes, it's not a happy space. The first floor, different.
Spaces.
The basement's tough because there are no windows. The rooms that were being
right,
offered.
the ones we looked at, they were basements. It was basements. I think that you're going to tell the public that if you want to listen in on this hearing, you're going to have to go sit in the basement and listen in on this hearing or something. That seemed really.
Boy, we live in a very wonderful world and a very wonderful country. I agree that it's not necessarily the most ideal space, but it's also not the worst space either.
I didn't say it was the worst.
Okay, we're getting off track.
Yeah, we are.
Ruth?
I think I agree with Janet. I think I would like to keep all the standing committees in the State House. And that's why I'm trying to figure out what we can move out of the State House in order to free up space. With all due respect to staff, and I hear all of you and I'm sorry, but you're some of the things on the table, so to speak. And I do think we would be doing it not just because of COVID. We would be doing it because of all the other things that I mentioned about comfort and safety.
Yeah, but
we're there before COVID.
And those things could be longer term though. I just don't want us to make quick decisions.
Yeah, and I think that nothing we do for next session necessarily would be permanent. We could do some temporary things that are just a quick, to make it more comfortable and feasible for next session and then have a longer term.
Moving Ledge Council to 2 Aiken's pretty permanent.
That is a big move. That is a big move. But I'm thinking about other options and.
That involves a lot of layers there. To move Mike Ferrant is much easier, but once you start moving 25 legislative or legal counsel, that's a whole different, because you have to have editing, you've got all the IT equipment, that's a major move.
Are we going to schedule one?
Yeah, so I got one more.
I'm John Dumville, Friends of the State House. I'm your outsider. I think it's important that you keep your standing committees in the State House because of the way you work together. Spreading you out is going to make it much harder. I don't know how many people work in legislative council or how many people were at number 2 at Governor Aiken Avenue. When I was working, look, a lot of people in that building.
You can put a lot of people.
A lot of room.
Again, you got it.
Use, and you got individual rooms.
That's correct.
And bigger rooms.
That's correct.
That would free up a lot of space in the State House to use as committee rooms or meeting rooms, gathering spaces. I know how horrible it is to move. I was a state worker. I worked at Historic Preservation and loved it. Loved working with people. Our office for a number of years was at, I think it was 6 Baldwin Street, the old powerhouse for National Life Building, which for me was an ideal location because I worked very close with Buildings and General Services and with the Vermont Historical Society. When they moved me up to the National Life Building, I call it National Death Building, it was horrible because it was so far away. I lost connections with the people at BGS and I lost connections with VHS. And I can see that would happen with your committees if you spread your committees all out across the Capitol complex. I think it's important you keep your standing committees close together in one building. And if you have to move legislative council out, it's a 5-minute at the most walk over here. Buildings and General Services are coming back and forth to the State House all the time. They're able to meet committees. There's warnings, and you have to adjust.
I have an idea. It kind of was one of the themes that came through the interviews. And perhaps some of the survey responses as well. It's just, some were wondering about public health guidance or just impartial, sort of review of our options. And, maybe that could help, especially looking at the airflow or air quality versus air comfort question and COVID and the kind of unknowns that we are facing in the fall. And we just don't know where we're going, but we know we hope it's in a good place, and knock on wood it is. But I don't know if that would help us.
I don't either. At this point. I know Michael O'Grady popped in when he heard about legislative council.
I would just like to say that if you are going to move people to 2 Aiken and expect us to be going back and forth continuously, because it is probably twice to 3 times as long between Pink Lady and the State House and between 2 Aiken, then you're going to actually have to shovel the street and keep it free of ice and snow, which is not the current standard that the street and the sidewalk is managed at. There have been legislators and staff and public who have fallen on that direct route and severely injured themselves. So if you want us to be there, then you have to maintain it at a level of public safety.
That's a fair statement. Thank you, Michael. That's very fair.
Sidewalk and 9 Ball.
And then sidewalk to 9 Baldwin. Is that the state that, no, it's the city that takes care of all that.
The city starts at 6 Baldwin, going up the rest of the way.
How about Aiken? Who does Aiken?
I think that's the state.
Yeah, ask Mike a question.
And then I want to get into.
Yeah, Mike, how many currently are working in Ledge Council?
Well,
know we're
that's a good
down.
question. Do you mean people on parental leave?
I mean,
as well?
our staff at its fullest when everybody's back working.
Do you include the drafting operations in that question?
Yes.
That's your editing, correct?
Yeah.
Proofreading?
There's about.
There's 16 lawyers.
Their website, there's 19 in Ledge Council. I'm not sure how many drafters.
There's 18 attorneys, there's 1 law clerk, and then there are 7 drafting operations employees.
And how many interns? Because we also have the law school interns we gotta have.
That depends from year to year, but last year I believe there were 3.
Yeah, there you go.
So Michael, of that 26, that also includes the editing, drafting operation?
It does.
Okay.
You have temporary hires that come on just for the session?
Yeah, the interns and the clerk.
Operations list too.
4 usually.
Joe, capacity.
So Michael,
Depends how
are
they.
you there still?
I am.
And maybe this will be a further conversation.
Come this way.
Really?
If the council should move down to 2 Aiken, would it be helpful to have space in the State House that could be used by all folks? A center spot for them, either to meet with legislators or to do some work that they may need to do in the interim before they go to another. Keep all the committees in the State House. And we could put aside a space that could be used for your operations, the lawyers.
How big of a space would it be?
Pardon?
How big of a space would it be?
I don't know. I'm just putting that out. In terms of a common area that they could access our IT system, because I know my legislative council person sometimes has a really hard time on my committee assistant's computer quickly to access her documents. She can't do it. So there's a logistical issue there, but I'm also thinking of a common space, a space that could be used specifically for Ledge Council for your folks that could help so that they're not running back and forth to 2 Aiken.
I would need to see more detail on that. I can't really say for an office whether or not that would be helpful, or it would just create an expectation that we're going to be here and not in our offices. Frankly, I would prefer to do a lot of the work that we do in our offices because it is confidential and it's much easier to work off of our desktop computers than it is off of our laptops.
Yeah.
Okay, I just thought I'd put something on the table, that's all. So,
No, I think that's a big
that's a big issue.
conversation.
It's a big issue. So
How much renovation?
let's figure out, are people up to meeting once a week for the next 3 weeks? I'm putting that out there. I mean, we gotta, we're in July.
Not quite, but
We're
almost.
in July. We have a report due August 15th. I'm just pushing because I'm dealing with reality here. I know it's summer. This was not going to be an easy committee. This was going to be a real heavy lift.
Do we just stay on Tuesdays?
We can stay, do you want to stay on Tuesdays? That would be July 6th, July 12th, 13th, I'm sorry, my calendar does weird things. And July 20th.
I probably would not be able to make all those, although I would zoom in on them. I'm not going to be in town.
For any of them?
No, at least next week, I know that for sure.
About other folks?
I'm here the 6th and 13th and gone on the 20th, and I might be able to zoom on that, I might not.
About other folks?
Janet says she's good.
I'm here the 6th and the 20th, but not the 13th, and I'm driving somewhere, so I could not zoom in.
Other folks? Stay available?
I can be available in person or by Zoom. I'm not sure I can do in person all of them.
Okay.
Do you want to do it here or do you want to do it in the State House?
On the 15th, we have to do it in the State House.
Why? We don't have to be there.
The
We
reason
just
we're
have to
in
be in
this room
person.
is because the State House is close to the public and we have to be in a publicly accessible room.
Right.
For open meeting.
But I think they want the meetings to be, if there are legislative meetings, to be in the State House.
That's the
as of
impression I was-
July 15th.
Okay.
Or I thought just in person, but anyway, doesn't matter. We have 4 rooms ready.
So I'm really feeling, this is me personally, I don't know about the other folks, but 3 hours is not long enough. So I'll put that out there for you folks.
Well, it hasn't been because look, it's 4:45.
I know. So do we do it 10 to 3?
I'd way rather,
I'd rather,
I'm
either
just-
the morning or the
Yeah.
afternoon.
Okay, I'm just putting
The middle.
out to see
Yeah.
what people are comfortable with.
I'd rather just devote one part of the day rather than bridge the day.
1 to 5,
Yeah, 1 to 5 is easier than.
Yeah.
Than,
okay, 1 to 5.
For those 3 days?
Yep.
Can I just ask, if we miss a meeting, are we voting on like the final report? Or are we taking individual votes along the way on individual items?
Saw how today worked.
Well, yeah, I saw how today, but as the chair, what is your preference that we
I
just
think
sort
if
of?
we can
You'll be here on this.
kind of make decisions as we go along, that's what's going to happen.
It's iterative, so if we can make a decision that helps
Leads
us.
to another.
Yeah.
exactly.
We might as well.
Wonder what I'm going to miss by missing one day if I,
I'd
like to-
I thought if during the regular session, if you're in a regular committee meeting on Zoom, well, actually, I'm saying it wrong. I think there's a rule about it. You have to be present to vote.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, there still is.
There still is. That doesn't go away.
As of the 15th of July, there is that rule again. Until the
Could
15th.
could I interject? You are not a purely legislative study committee. You have members that are not
That's right.
legislators on it. So you're not governed by the rules of the General Assembly. You're governed by the open meeting law. And the open meeting law allows for remote voting.
Oh,
Thank you.
Good.
thanks, Michael.
And that doesn't go away when the restrictions have been lifted. Is that correct?
No, because the restrictions that are lifted are the joint rules. And the joint rules only apply to joint legislative committees. You are not a joint legislative committee, you're a public body.
But I'm talking about the governor's executive order. Loosening
The governor has already been requiring public bodies to apply to to comply with the open meeting law.
Yeah, a while ago.
So our underlying open meeting law allows remote voting?
It does.
From what I heard.
I'm not so sure about that, does it?
We'll find out. That's Ledge Council.
Gotta find out.
I think it does.
It does.
I
think so too.
School board, yeah. I did
Select
this.
boards, you could.
Yeah.
I think it is.
You can vote if there is anything that's a non-consensus vote. It has to be by roll call. But otherwise you can meet remotely. You are meeting remotely right now.
Yep.
So you said the 6th, the 13th?
The 6th, the 13th, and the 20th, from 1 to 5.
Same time each.
Yep. So on the 6th and the 13th, we'll be in this room.
Somebody's going to send us some out.
Right?
Would be in this room.
For the 6th and the 13th, because we can't be in the State House yet.
Till the 15th.
We could be in the State House after the 6th, I think.
That's what I was.
Yeah.
15th. It's the 15th for committee meetings. The State House is opening up to the public on the 6th, but it is the 15th that
I think-
legislative committees can start meeting.
Oh,
State
And a must. I thought that was a must.
That
I
is
think we
Before.
That is correct, Amy.
There is a little confusion, but joint rules. Are you on joint rules?
I'm on joint rules.
Oh, you are?
And
Yeah.
Okay, let me see here.
I miss.
Let me see.
A meeting, the next.
I think we're okay anytime to meet here.
Room to.
We're not
I'd
bound
rather
to.
meet in the State House because
Well,
we're talking about.
Why don't we ask
State
Jan?
House
Oh,
things.
who is clear on this?
I'd rather
So
meet,
the State House is opening to the public Tuesday.
Exactly.
yeah, but not,
That might need to ask Mike
hang
what
on.
rules are governing you, because he just said you're a
Becky.
public body.
Right.
Not a legislative committee.
Betsy Ann is our,
So, today, the joint rules met to confirm the date on which joint meetings will be back to fully meeting in person, starting July 15th. All joint committees will be back to meeting in person, and some committees have decided to meet in person before this date, in locations outside of the State House. That's us.
Not a joint.
I think this is not a joint committee.
I think,
I think that's the issue.
exactly. I think we could meet if we wanted on the 13th.
But I'm gonna be strong
You would,
on this one. After July 15th, we can meet in the State House as a committee, and we are talking about State House space and how it's going to operate as a committee. I think we need to be in the State House to have those conversations. Because we're talking about our home.
I don't think anyone disagrees
No one's
with that.
disagreeing. We're thinking we could meet there.
I
think we're all with you.
Okay. So after July 15th, we can meet in the State House.
How do you really feel about it?
We think we can.
The part that has me confused, I thought,
We can meet there sooner is the point.
We think we can.
I think we must,
Ask somebody and just let us know.
I think we must after the 15th.
Yes, but we think we can
There,
before
it's
that.
open
Because we're
Yes.
not.
probably can't.
so,
think we
so
can.
if you want to meet there before the 6th or before the 15th, you have to do what any other public body would do. You have to get the approval of the Sergeant at Arms and reserve a room. And if you're going to have remote participation, you're going to have to comply with the electronic participation requirements of the open meeting law, which requires that there be a place where the public can go to participate in that meeting.
Right, so we're meeting the first time on the 6th, which is the day the State House opens. So technically, the public can go in there that day, so we could meet in the State House, right? It's just a question of, do we have to before then?
Janet.
It's a question if the Sergeant at Arms would approve it. And then if it's approved, whether or not any room can comply with the remote participation requirements at that point.
So Kevin,
There's, we are waiting on some equipment. Fit up properly. We might be able to have one ready.
We should have.
so that's pick the 15th.
Well, originally it was.
Yeah,
never heard of it. Originally, they were, IT was.
What's that?
In August, and so then. Butterfly. Now they've been pushed back 2 weeks, and just be.
Oh, your butterfly. I love that.
Needs and what they can provide, and they're also trying to do all the rooms, I believe, all the other rooms as well, so
Why don't we do our next meeting next week here? Because that's easier.
I think the 13th is a more attainable goal.
That was so much harder than it needed to be.
I missed the piece.
Check your email.
Everybody was okay for next week to go up to the
Stanton
state.
says.
The email, that's right, for the email.
Check your email.
Oh, I was focused on looking for the email, so I didn't.
Yeah.
So we'll come up with an agenda and I reach out to folks. If folks have thoughts that you want to have on the agenda, please reach out to me. Mike Parent and I work on putting together the agenda. And because we are subject to the public meeting law, we have to post the agenda 48 hours prior to our meeting, which means on Friday, we have to post the agenda this week, Friday. So it's a real short turnaround to get the agenda posted. And Mike does post it to our committee webpage.
And happily emails it to us, which is.
But just keep that in mind. If you got something that you'd like to have on the agenda for next week, please connect with me. So we can, Mike and I can work to be done Friday.
BGS update, I think is, we're looking for.
Yeah, he's number one.
Me too.
Discussion, planning. Cover a lot of things.
What you posted in your conversation will